Well, if we're going to do it, we're going to do it right. Let's see how much of this I could do in 3 minutes. So, Mark chapter 7. We'll start at verse 1 for context. And the Pharisees and some of the scribes assembled to him, having come from Jerusalem, and seeing some of his Talmudim, disciples, eat bread with defiled, that is, unwashed hands, they found fault. For the Pharisees and all the Yehudim, Judeans, do not eat unless they wash their hands thoroughly, holding fast the tradition of the elders. Pay attention to that. And from the marketplace they do not eat unless they wash. And there are many others which they have received and hold fast, the washing of cups and utensils and copper vessels and couches. Verse 5, Then the Pharisees and scribes asked him, Why do your Talmudim disciples not walk according to the tradition of the elders, but eat bread with unwashed hands? What does all that mean, Austin? I'm glad you asked. Because Christians love to say that Yeshua and his disciples went around breaking Torah all the time. So that's obviously a sign that the Torah doesn't matter anymore. This, of course, is incorrect. Case in point. It was a common Hebrew tradition at the time to wash your hands before you eat. There's both, obviously, physical implications behind that because, it's just cleanliness. But there was also a belief or superstition, whatever you want to call it, that if you ate with unwashed hands, then you would ingest negative energy or possibly unclean spirits into yourself. Later in the chapter, Yeshua rebukes the Pharisees for this teaching because his disciples were not in fact violating Torah, because there is no commandment in the Torah, first 5 books of the Bible, that commands you to wash your hands before you eat. It's cleanliness, but it's not a commandment. So no commandment was broken in this case. The Pharisees just got their draws in a knot because they were not keeping tradition, not because they weren't keeping Torah. And Yeshua rebukes them for this in verse 6, And he answered and said to them, Well did Yeshayahu, Isaiah, quote-unquote, the prophet, concerning you hypocrites, as it has been written, This people respect me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. And in vain do they worship me, teaching as teachings, or doctrine, the commands of men. Forsaking the commandment of Elohim, you hold fast the tradition of men, washing of pots and cups and many other like matters. And he said to them, Well do you put aside the command of Elohim in order to guard your tradition. This scene is Yeshua rebuking the Pharisees for upholding tradition over the commandments of the Most High. A teaching that taught that eating with unwashed hands defiled you spiritually, which is not in Torah. So in essence, to fit the Christian agenda, they added that saying at the end of verse 19, saying, Thus Yeshua declared all foods clean. But this whole conversation is not talking about food. He's rebuking a tradition, not doing away with the Most High's dietary commandments in Leviticus 11 and Deuteronomy 14. The commandments are forever, and that's all there is to it. So let me just start off by saying thank you for the way that you asked this question. Unfortunately, when discussing these topics, it usually brings out the ugly side of people, especially when the questions do not agree with their personal opinions. Just want to say this is always a breath of fresh air. So from a biblical standpoint, it's not just, quote, some people who believe that eating certain foods is wrong. It's a commandment. You'll find that in Leviticus chapter 11 and Deuteronomy 14. The list, of course, includes pork, shellfish. There are certain birds, such as vultures, that you're not supposed to eat. Of course, who in God's green earth would want to eat a vulture is beyond me, but anyway. Now, what people have to realize is every commandment in the Torah has a reason, and it's not just if you don't do this, then you have, quote, sinned and you're going to bust hell wide open. Disobedience to the Torah is a very egregious sin, and disobeying the Torah is the definition of sin, but that's not the whole story. Using the dietary instructions, for example, every animal that you see considered unclean in Scripture, pigs, shellfish, etc., are by definition not just biblically unclean, but they are unhealthy. When both of my paternal grandparents were diagnosed with congestive heart failure, their heart doctors immediately told them to discontinue eating pork. Because as we know, pork is horrible for your heart, it's horrible for your blood pressure, horrible for your cholesterol, the list goes on. And we're not even going to talk about the amount of parasites in pork, but we'll leave that alone. Shellfish and other certain fish, such as catfish, for example, they are bottom feeders. They are the oceans and waters trash compactors, if you will. They eat everything off the bottom to include other sea creatures' feces, trash, everything. And everything that they consume, and you eat them, you're consuming everything they have consumed. No amount of cooking is going to cleanse them and everything that's in their blood and their veins and so forth. Same goes for pork. Likewise, pigs are the trash compactors for the land. They will eat anything and everything. My great-granddaddy used to raise animals on a farm, one of which being hogs, and they would fix slop for them. Literally just combine leftover foods, grains, all this other, and mix it up and wait till it come alive, as my grandmama would say. In other words, maggots and so forth, flies. And they'd give that to them and it'd fatten them up. And did you also know that a pig can consume a human corpse in less than 8 minutes? All in all, these facts were not entirely known back then. So the Creator in his infinite wisdom knew these things were unclean and unhealthy, so he commanded them not to be eaten or touched. Oh, and Acts 10 doesn't nullify any of those commandments. I'll talk about that in the next video.